Alright, so first of all, thanks to everybody for coming. My name is Nick Thomas. This is a presentation I put together called Economic Literacy. And what I've done is I've set it up into basically 3 different stages. So each one will probably be like 20-25 minutes, and then I left time for some questions because I want to make sure that there are none before we move on to the next part. Because it's kind of like we're building a foundation. Really, at the end of this, my goal is for you guys to actually view the economy in a totally different light, where you're actually able to be comfortable with what's happening rather than kind of searching for headlines, trying to guess who's actually telling you the truth and who's just trying to talk to get on TV, and being able to, like I said, visualize the economy so that you can make better and more informed decisions for your finances, whether it be in business or with the personal. So this kind of grabbed me actually. This stems from, this is kind of like an introduction to some of the concepts. I ended up writing a book on accident about this, and so this is one of the quotes I found while I was looking into introducing these concepts. But it's from a gentleman named Marcel Proust, who's a French writer from the 1800s, and says the real voyage to discovery lies not in seeking new landscapes, but in seeing with new eyes, and that's really what this is about. I find that, and it happened for me too. I first became interested in the economy when I was a teenager. And we'll get into a little bit about that, but I've been watching it for now the past 30 years. And so, but it was the time that I took a step back and grabbed I literally kept all of my notes in one spot. It's like the one thing moving around the country multiple times that I was like, I know exactly where this is at all times. And my thought was, even though I didn't understand a lot of those things at the time, my thought was, one day I keep at this and these things are going to start making sense, and I bet I can put it together. And I did that a couple of years ago, and it kind of astounded me how easily it all fit together. And you go, okay, here's the system, here's how this thing is laid out. So, but I want to start with something, since we're agents. This is the kind of stuff that we're inundated with on a daily basis. You guys see this for real estate, you see it all the time in the economy. It always seems like the world is going to end, like we're going to have a big collapse, right? Well, it generates a lot of likes, it generates a lot of clicks, a lot of shares, because it does look scary. So what this implies, obviously, is that millennials have it much worse than the baby boomers did in 1985 when they were trying to buy a house, right? It's if you actually break out and do the math, it takes It's 3.5 times their income for boomers and 6.25 times the income for millennials to buy a house. But we're agents. We know most people don't put cash down to buy an entire home, especially people that are starting out. They're buying the payment. They're buying what they can get, right? That's the payment that they're sending out every month. So when you actually turn around and do the math, it comes out to be the same thing. So mortgage rates in 1985 were 13.5%. At the end of 2002, they were 7%. We came into the year, they were 3%. So we're saying, okay, at the end of 2022, interest rates were 7%. Now you take a payment with a 15% down payment, and it comes out to 40% of their annual income. So it's basically the same thing. It's a wash, right? So you get some give here, you're going to have some take there. That's the way the economy works. It's basically the way everything works. So the reason I'm pointing this out is because it's important to see that a lot of the things that we're inundated with, they don't tell the story. It's just an image to get a reaction, right? And so this is actually a trader quote. So I started trading 21 years ago now, and that's where a lot of my deep dive has come from into the markets, because I wanted to better understand the economy so I could become a better trader, right? And so this is Jesse Livermore is one of the most famous traders of all time. He made the equivalent of $1 billion by himself in the 1929 crash by by accurately predicting it. But this actually goes to the overall economy too, which is, you don't worry about what the markets are going to do. Worry about what you're going to do in response to the markets. Basically, have a plan. There's only 3 things it can do. It can go up, sideways, or down. So really you only need 3 plans. And then you got to have an idea of what those things look like in order to start implementing those plans. So I find that, it's real easy when you start getting into this stuff. You see all the doom and gloom, and then you get and we're predisposed to protect what we have more than we are to go gain more. And that kind of hits us at a more fundamental level with our nature, whereas there's nothing you can do. What's going to happen is going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it, so you might as well have a plan and respond accordingly when that happens, right? So this is a gentleman I follow. He's actually from Minnesota. I'm from Minnesota as well, but he was on the Chicago Stock Exchange for years. Now he actually trades on his own. But one of my favorite things about him is that he posts some of the greatest books. Like I'm an avid reader. I love reading, but he posts some incredible books about markets. And this is one that he posted a few years ago, and I read it a couple years ago. But it's interesting. So this is, these stock exchange people are quite silly, full of instability, insanity, pride, and foolishness. They will sell without knowing the motive. They will buy without reason. It's a 335-year-old book. This book was written in the Netherlands, shortly after markets began trading for the very first time. And what it shows us is that when you read this book, it can be written today. The only thing that's changed are the words and the clothes that we wear, really. And it's the exact same thing. And so that tells us that this is more of a human nature thing, that nothing is really changing. We're just perceiving it to be a bigger change than what it is. So you can actually, this was one of the things, well, wait a minute, if the same thing keeps happening over and over again, you just got to find the intricacies in there to know what the differences are. It's the nuance, right? And so from there, it's trying to figure out how to put something together here. So I created a title, Economic Literacy. And what it is the ability to accurately track economic cycles to make informed and well-timed financial decisions. It's things like, is now a good time to buy a house? Is now a good time to buy a car? Is now a good time to take a big family vacation? Well, there are times when it's, you're fine. There's times when no, and you don't want to be switching jobs right now either, because we're rolling into an economic slowdown, and if you switch jobs, you're probably going to get laid off first, because the last one in the door is typically the first one to go when the layoffs start hitting, right? So it's being aware of those things, and you don't have to pay attention to it on a regular basis. Really just pay attention to it on a quarterly basis, because these are 6 to 10 year trends. So they happen slowly, right? So and that's the other thing too, is that instead of panicking when everything hits the fan, it's having that plan in place and knowing more than likely what's going to happen next, because it's happened for the last 350 years that way. So, making a financial plan based on economic cycles. So, it's things like increasing your savings for approaching economic slowdown. So you're coming towards the end of the expansion phase, but things are running great, but then they're going to start slowing down, right? So after it slows down, typically we get the recession, money dries up. So that's why you want to make sure you have more padding in your bank account at that time. It's when to begin cutting expenses for that probable recession when it comes in, and then when to start spending and investing again if you do that. For better deals and larger gains. So think of it as a real estate agent. And at the end here, we're going to show you how we're going to take something I call the economy tracker, which I'll introduce to you here, but how by using that, you can actually then make marketing plans based on what the market typically does during different phases of the economic cycle. Because obviously if housing is rolling over, you don't want to be maxed out on your marketing budget, right? You want to be slowly taking it down a little bit, because you want to preserve as much cash as you can, because when it seems like everything's going to get worse, that's the time that you want to start jumping back in again. Deals are better, and you're going to get far more leverage out of it, and a lot of your competitors who weren't planning for it will probably be gone, so it'll be easier to get deals. So if you do that, then you can protect more of what you've earned and accumulated during the boom years when the getting's good, and then you can put that additional cash to work at the best time in the next cycle so that you can earn more with it. So, and do that multiple times throughout your life, because a typical cycle, a typical credit cycle is about 6 or 7 years. So we work through a number of those. And if you do that a number of times, then you move you further away from living paycheck to paycheck. You don't have those constant ups and downs. We're trying to make this as easy as possible, right? As smooth as possible. Which means you get to financial freedom faster, yay! Because this is what we're all going for, right? It's different for everybody. Some people want a bunch of money, some people want the time. Whatever that is, that's you. If you're aware of these cycles and you make plans and you act on them, you're going to get there faster. So, how are we going to learn it? First of all, we're going to see the connection between nature and the economy and markets. That sounds voodoo-ish. There was a time I would have thought the exact same thing. I kind of stumbled upon this, again, through trading, by learning about something called Fibonacci, and it's kind of blown my mind, and it opened this whole thing up for me. You're going to learn how those patterns then lead to cycles and reoccurring patterns. You're going to get an easy to understand definition of the credit cycle and why it's the golden key. So if you go and try to research what is a credit cycle, you will get 1,000 different answers. And some will be economic cycles the same as a business cycle, some will be a business cycle, and then the credit cycle kind of work hand in hand, but the economic cycle, it's just all over the place, right? So I'm going to give you a real easy one that breaks it down. I'm going to give you a way to visualize the economy. This is something really cool that through kind of stumbling upon this economy tracker thing, once I put it on the charts for both the economy and for the market, going back 30 years, it really kind of opened my eyes, like, oh, this is a visual thing. You can see and feel this thing, rather than it just kind of being out there, right? And then I'll introduce you to the economy tracker, and then I'm going to give you examples of how the data moves and people feel during each credit cycle, so that'll help answer a little bit more of the questions, because it always seems like right before a recession, things seem fine. Like, we're like, okay, we had some trickiness, we slowed down, we're starting to go up again, and then it's like, bam, you get hit, right? That happens every time. So we're going to explain how that process works. So, and then how you're going to know when you have achieved economic literacy, you can not only explain it to somebody else, but you can make a financial plan based on the credit cycle, whether, again, it's for your business or for personal. All right, so this next one's a little graphic, but I think it's important. It's who am I, and how in the fuck do I think I can teach you this, and what's my angle anyway? I put that in originally, so a lot of these slides, they start with just kind of me going, right? And I was going to take it out, and wait a minute, I think this is kind of important. And it's important because anytime anybody tells you anything about the economy, you should always be like, who the fuck are you? Why should I listen to you, right? And you should always think that there's an angle there, because there always is. I can't tell you how many trading seminars, economic seminars, books, podcasts, I can't tell you how many I've gone to. Almost every seminar, any like meeting with somebody who's like, hey, I'll help you. It's always like, hey, buy this product. I don't even have a product to sell right now. Like, the book's done, I'm getting the cover done. I hope that you end up buying it, but I'm not like, hey, you need this in order to learn this stuff. It helps, but you don't, right? But I think that this stuff that I'm going to give you is extremely important, and I think it leads to a lot of the inequity that we see, because people at the bottom tiers aren't aware of it, because it takes a lot of time to figure this stuff out, and they're getting screwed by the people on the top because they're the ones that know it. Well, they're not going to share it because it helps them get elevated even more for the next credit cycle, right? So, what's my angle anyway? Quite honestly, it's just that I think that this is so important. I think that this should be taught in school. I think this is like a sophomore level class, and not even like an entire semester. I think it's this part on how the economy actually operates and what to look for with the phases, I think is a lot easier than what we've been sold. Now, investing, trading it, totally different scenarios. But just living your life and knowing when it's good time to start spending money again, and knowing when is a good time to make more investments in your business or get into investing, or when it's time to just tighten up the belt strings and get ready for, a pretty rough, year and a half typically, right? I think that's important, and that's my main angle. I think that this is just something that everybody should be aware of. So, a little bit about me. So my name is Nick Thomas. Began trading 21 years ago now, which is weird, once I actually did that. So I come from, but here's the thing, I come from a large family of entrepreneurs, and a lot of which are in the trades. I talked to a couple of my cousins who are plumbers, have always had their own business. Their dad was a plumber. My first job was working for them at 13 years old. My dad came in on a Sunday, he gave me a week of school off, and then he came on Sunday night and said, by the way, your cousin Paul's coming in at 6:30, he's gonna pick you up at 6:30, you're working for him all summer. I was pissed. But it was one of the greatest things I ever experienced. And you're around other contractors. My dad was an agent. A lot of his close buddies were contractors, and I remember at one point in the 80s, one of his good friends actually had to move in with us because he lost everything because he got wiped out. So these are things that are kind of like that were embedded in me, and it's just and so it's like there's got to be another way, right? So I think I've just kind of gone through life like looking for these things, and I'm like a mad crazy like researcher. I like looking for answers. And so I've always looked for these things. I've never been able to find it. So, but my career background, for 20 years I was in the industrial cleaning equipment. Actually a little bit longer than that. I started at 16. Actually my mother started dating a gentleman who is now my stepdad. They got married about a year later. And he was making this really cool piece of equipment that would clean runways. And so when an airplane lands, it leaves a little bit of tire residue or a little bit of rubber residue. That builds up, and if they don't take that off, then the planes can't stop, and they slide the hydroplane right off the runway if you don't get it done. So what was cool about it is it was an environmentally friendly way of doing it. So up until that point, it was all it was all chemicals and just flooding, like putting down a punch of water and not recovering it, right, and blowing all the stuff off in the infield. So he developed a unit that would clean and recover it without the use of a vacuum, and then we would recycle the cleaning water. So fast forward, 12 years, and I got, at that point, I was helping out with some R&D because I was on the road selling to like Disney World and to the casinos in Vegas and contractors all over the country. We ended up selling the company, and I went to work for the company that bought us, traveling around the country, training their reps, training the dealers and the maintenance crew as well. So that really kind of, again, like dealing with so many businesses around the country in the lead up to 08, through 08, and on the backside of 08 was another like big wild experience. Like I was at the Mirage. They were going to send out a PO. And he's like, Nick, I sent out my POs on second week of January every year, and this is how we always do it. And everything this guy had told me for the previous 2 to 3 years was like spot on, right? And so this time it didn't happen. And this was 2008. And so it didn't happen. I was like, this is weird. So I set up a meeting with him. I go into his office, and I'm like, hey, just trying to figure out. He's like, I want it. He's like, we need it. And so he kind of like peeks around his door, and he goes, you follow the market, right? And I said, yeah. And he goes, I don't know nearly what I know now, and I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what was going on underneath the surface. But he's like, all right, man. He's like, here's the deal. We're not allowed, like, they have put the kibosh on all capital expenses. Like, we can't buy anything. Like, it's just regular maintenance stuff. He's like, we're not buying equipment. We're not doing anything. He's like, I've never seen anything like this. It's like, well, what's going on? He's like, man, he's like, we have traders from Wall Street. Their sole job is to just keep an eye on the economy. That's it. They get paid a ton of money to just sit there and watch the economy all the time and markets. And he's like, they're freaking out. He's like, I've never seen anything like this. I've been doing this for 30 years. I have no idea what's coming.
What year was that?
That was 2008. This meeting was in March of 2008. So again, it just kind of hammers in. It's like, there's something going on. There's something there. There's something that people know. It's there and it exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to find it? So So that was so what it began as an intrigue into markets when I was a teenager. It's turned into this like full-blown obsession. Like it hasn't gone away. Like I've had to table it several times while I was working for the companies, because it would start to interfere like with my time. It would start to take too much. I get too into it. So the other thing is too is I was, am, and always will be a why kid. Like I would just annoy the hell out of my parents and my older siblings. And be like, why does this happen? Why is it like that? I always have to know not only what's going on, but how we got there, right? And that's really why I read all the time. So I'm always like, well, how did that happen? Like, how do you get to a place like that, right? And so all of these things, the background, and then also working with Clean Equipment, being on your own on the other side of the country. You got an issue, and you're trying to sell a bunch of units to Disney World that make or break for your family business, and you're like, and this issue comes up. You got to learn how to spot the issues, but then also find the remedy and apply that, and then test it until it's a good working option, until a good working option is found. And sometimes that means it's not the issue that keeps breaking. It's not the component. It's a system or two or three that's down the road, right? Like we had one issue where we had a new supplier that made a small, like it was like an eighth of like a millimeter change, and it screwed something up when we were blowing through pumps like crazy. But they thought it was so insignificant that they didn't let anybody know, right? So it's kind of it's the same thing with the economy. It's what interacts together and how does that happen? So. And then, like I said, having a unique perspective of working with companies of all sizes around the country to lead up to and during the recovery of the Great Financial Crisis really helped me kind of see the economy a little bit different. So, I'm not a financial planner. This is not investment advice. I'm not going to teach you how to trade. I'm not going to teach you. There's ways to do this, but this was like my foundation for this. Is now everything I have here is now part of my daily routine. Like this is how I trade, this is how I invest based on what's happening within here. This is the basics. This is really to educate and hopefully entertain you guys in the process. So before we begin though, and these are a few of the things that trip up people, including myself. This held me back for years, all of these things. So nothing's going to hold you back more than your opinion of the Fed or the sitting president. Doesn't matter. There's a presidential cycle within markets because they all get a signature package that they do in their second year. So the first year, typically not a lot happens. Second year second year is usually one of the worst, but that's when one of the slowest growth periods. But that's when they get their signature legislation passed. And then that money starts flowing into the economy. So the only thing that you should it's not a matter of who the president is, it's a matter of what their priorities is, right? So it's knowing where that money is going to flow to. And so it does, and with the Fed, it's like you don't even know what audit the Fed means. Like it doesn't matter. Like the system is there, you get rid of the Fed, it's still there. It doesn't matter. Like this was there before the Fed, and it'll be there after the Fed. It was there when we had a Federal Reserve was it the late 1700s, I think we did our first one, early 1800s, and we got rid of it. All these patterns existed throughout, Fed or no Fed. The economy operates in a managed system, and what you think of that system is completely irrelevant. You only have so much time and energy. So what benefit is it of complaining about the system that we are actually operating in? It's not going to do anything. Right? It's not going to help you provide for your family. It's not going to help you get ahead in your business. It's the worst thing you can do is know that something exists and then not take advantage of it to help yourself. And then by helping yourself, then you can get a bit more of a base behind you, and then that's how you start making the changes, right? It's the change from inside. This is the biggest hang-up. I see a lot of people say they're constantly like, oh, it's the Fed, and it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, why were you going to read all these books about why the Fed is bad? It doesn't do anything for you, right? It's just bad energy, energy, or putting out bad energy, or putting out energy into something that's not going to help, which is not good. And the main point when you're looking at the economy and markets is to analyze. It's not to become an activist. I find that this is a common thing. I've been there. I feel like this is a big growth hurdle for a lot of people to get over, is because when you start getting into this, things start to make sense a little bit, and then all of a sudden you got some contradictions. So whatever worked before no longer works, and you kind of you get confused, and you get pissed off, you get angry, and it's getting difficult because it's not easy when you don't know what's coming next, right? We're kind of winging it as we go through the phases. So I think a lot of people that complain about the economy start researching it to get ahead, but then it becomes difficult, so they get confused and they become activists. So one of the best lines I've seen is the money already printed, so you just got to go get it. Like, it's out there, right? So the other thing is, if you think the market is wrong about something, then that's at least two mistakes you've made. First of all, the first one is thinking that the market's ever wrong. The market is everybody. Whatever the market does, that's what it's doing. That's how the score is kept. The market's not wrong. You just misjudged what was going to happen, and so that was your second. That was actually your first mistake. The second mistake was thinking that the market and the economy could actually be wrong. And then when something happens or changes, instead of waiting to find out what you should think from your favorite political commentator, or I forgot to rewrite this one, but basically this is, when you find out something new, are you saying, how can I benefit from this? How can whatever this change is, how can it help my business, or how can I minimize the damage that this could cause my business? Or do you run to television or talk radio and wait for your favorite politician or commentator to tell you what to think and how to feel about it? Who cares? You're just going to be angry, and then you're not going to get any of the benefits out of it either. So, and this really all comes from, I think the reason that people get into it is for the right reasons. They want to take advantage. They want a better life for themselves and their loved ones. But it's going down these other avenues that trip us up. So what we want to do is we want to think of the economy and markets as a puzzle, right? So all of these pieces are just pieces of a puzzle, but instead of a standard picture puzzle, these pieces, they kind of morph, right? Sometimes this one's bigger, sometimes it shrinks, and it's just understanding how that kind of works and how that all plays together. None of the concepts that are in here I came up with. I just kind of put all these things together. I mean, this is based on a lot more than this, but these are a few things. It's Dow theory, it's economic cycle theory, it's market psychology, trader psychology. There's a fantastic Ray Dalio video that he did. He put it on YouTube, I think in 2014, that explains a little bit about how the economy operates, and how that thing and how the gears all kind of move. And I think that was kind of a big part on helping me get through this, a decade ago. Stock Trader's Almanac is fantastic. He's the presidential cycle guy. He kind of goes through, this is what typically happens. And then there's 4 turning patterns, which are basically more like human behavior. Every 80 years, there's kind of like a dynamic shift, right? But those dynamic shifts happen over and over and over again. So, so I didn't invent this stuff. It's just all things that I learned as deeply as I could, which allowed me to start piecing it all together once I actually sat down to do it. So, we're going to start with a story. So, think of a farmer that is totally oblivious and unaware to the seasons. How much time, money, and effort they would waste by just kind of winging it based on a feel, right? So, how do they say, okay, well, it's been cold for the last 6 months, but now it's warming up again. So now maybe I should go plant, even though I just cultivated 6 weeks ago, because now the weather's getting warm. Well, if you're not aware of the seasons, that could just be a warm trend, right? And what is typically when you're starting to cool down more, right? That's basically the same way that we all live our financial lives, right? We're doing it based on feel. Well, this kind of reminds me of a year ago, and that was fine, and then we grew, and we're going to be just fine here. I'm going to start investing a little bit more in my business or whatever. I'm going to take that big family vacation. But if you're not aware that it's the end of the year, that it's the end of the cycle, then that's going to come back to haunt you. You just wasted all that time. You just wasted all that planning, all the money, and all the time. And then And then again, knowing when the prime times, when the right times are to start planting, start getting the land ready, and then when to cultivate, and then more importantly, when to take that time off, when to take your foot off the throttle a little bit and just start planning and spending a little bit more time with loved ones. Because just like a farmer can't really do much in the middle of winter, if business is slow, what are we doing? What's the point in grinding if there's nothing that's available, right? So, but those seasons, they're what's known as a fractal, meaning they're a pattern, but they're a pattern inside of another pattern. They're a pattern within the natural world, right? The world, the universe, the solar system, the galaxy. It all plays a part in how we get our seasons, right? So, and this is interesting because whenever I bring this up, even people who don't pay attention to markets, they all say the same thing. Well, everyone knows that the markets work on patterns, right? But nobody really knows what those patterns are. And it's true, but there's a bunch of different patterns. So that sounds cool, but can it be backed up with science? And it's with mathematics, which is considered the language of God, God's universe, whatever you're into. It's all backed up. And this is how it starts. So this is what's known as Fibonacci patterns. So everything is small to a DNA strand, and all the way up to the actual galaxy that the solar system resides in. That's not even just our solar system. There's a bunch of other ones within there. So, and then we see it all over the place on Earth. These are Fibonacci patterns. And so you don't have to know these, but these are the formulas for Fibonacci and how these things actually go and how these things work out in into the visuals. And then the Fibonacci sequence is actually easy. It's the first two numbers add to the next number. So it's 1 plus 1 equals 2, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5, 3 plus 5 equals 8, on and on and on. It goes and just gets bigger and bigger, right? So that's how this pattern is formed. So you go 1 and 1 gives you 2 by 2, and the 1 by 2 gives you the 3 by 3, so on and so forth. And that's how that pattern emerges, right? So to give you this. And so we see it everywhere. Beauty. The scientists have found that the beauty is actually what we consider beauty, and what has been considered beauty throughout the ages. It actually has to do with the most symmetry in a person's face, and that comes down. I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Fibonacci's just in the one on that one profile. So we also see Fibonacci in markets. So there's a crossover. So we have the natural world rolling into our markets, into our world. That tells me that these things are all connected, right? We're using the exact same thing. Here's an example. So this is Microsoft, and this is its recent move. So I actually printed this out. I already did this one today. So this is where it was when I left. So, and what you're going to see is that from where it bottomed here back in 2020, so this is March when the market bottomed out, it did a 0.618 retracement, which is a big fib level, a major fib level. Basically hit it to the T and then jumped up, and actually that's kind of, let's do this here. That one's clear. And then it ran up to a 1.618 retracement. You see this stuff all the time. It doesn't matter. This is a monthly chart. It doesn't matter what time frame it is. You see this stuff throughout the market. So again, it's bigger down to smaller. So bigger patterns down to fractals, 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 right? And it's as big as it gets. You see this throughout nature. This is really cool. So this is the Earth, which is the blue dot, and Venus is the more cream colored dot. So this is how they rotate the sun. And it basically puts in a pattern. This is actually a Fibonacci pattern, but it resembles a flower by the time it gets done. And this just keeps happening over and over and over again. Oh, this thing didn't go. Do this. Try to get this one. This is really cool. This needs to be seen. There's the market today. I think that needs to be I gotta work on my betting skills. We'll do this. Sit there and just kind of revolve around the sun, flying through the universe, right? So again, you tend to take a look at this, it's all patterns, it all consistently continues to happen over and over again. So that's where it's you got patterns and you have fractals, patterns within patterns, right? And once you know that, then you need to throw a little nuance in the mix. And nuance is just a subtle and distinct variation, a subtle or distinct variation. So a great example of that is how fast you typically drive to work on the freeway. You get on the 101, you know, I drive 75. Okay, well if it's raining, you're probably not. If it's once in the 10 years where we get snow, you're definitely not. If there's traffic, you're not. 80% of the time, you probably are, depending on when you're driving, depending on when you go. But there are times when that changes. That's the nuance. It's the difference, right? Knowing when those differences are and what they look like. And if you were to visualize markets, they would be very similar to, at least I think they would. They would be very similar to what we see in that video. But they're going to be a lot more herky-jerky and a lot more erratic because of human behavior. Because we're the reason, our behavior, the behavior of the masses are the reason that things go so far up and then so far down. And that's why it's not as smooth as we see when we look out into the stars, right? So that's the more voodoo stuff. So, do you guys have questions on that so far? Kind of make a little bit of sense though, kind of the tie-in. It's not just something that just happens, right? It's something that's there and has always been there. And that's the important thing for right now. So the patterns and the cycles to be aware of for the economy and the markets. So there's 4 main ones. We're going to concentrate on the first 2, which are going to be secular and credit. You have secular, credit, cyclical, and then presidential cycle. So presidential cycle, we kind of touched on. We touched on why you get that 4-year rotation. Cyclicals are really more of like we had a cyclical downturn last year, right? When the market came down 25%, that was a cyclical bear market. Now we're back in. We have been back into a cyclical bull market. So, but it's happening within one credit cycle, and it's part of a larger pattern, which is what's called the secular market. And this is an example of secular markets. So secular markets are 10 to 20 year periods where where markets either are advancing or moving sideways. This was a big blow for me because I always thought like secular market was things are hitting the fan. It's 1929. Like I grew up like my family growing up. Like I grew up with around my grandfather's siblings. He wasn't alive, but they all lived through the Depression. They're always looking for the next depression, right? And then so you look back, you're like, man, that's terrible. And then you look back, you're like, well, wait a minute, I started trading here in the middle of a secular bear market. I didn't even know it. Things were working, things were going up, It's more of these longer term where we go sideways, and basically what we're doing is we're digesting these huge gains that we've had from these other ones. And there are one of the main characteristics between all of these is that these are all periods of war. So you have Afghanistan and Iraq, you have Vietnam, and you have World War II leading up to Korea. So you have big, more larger global conflicts that during these times So money's really not going into advancing, our people. It's really going into more of a defensive posture, right? So things aren't progressing the way that they do during times of relatively more peace. So, but this is important because if you know what kind of a secular market it is, then you know how to plan for that credit cycle within there, for the credit cycles within the secular patterns too. So we've been in one now since 2013, and we're still in it. There's a lot of question, obviously, during 2020 if that was going to hold, and obviously it did. That's why it ripped back. That's a characteristic. That's why markets rip back. It's a characteristic of a secular bull market. So once you know, but again, these are pretty easy to spot over time. It's just when you're in the middle of these changes, it takes a little bit of time. But you can kind of see them coming, and you know when these cycles get a little long in the tooth. But the main one that you want to pay attention to is the credit cycle. These are your rates, your interest rates. This is what determines this. It's what determines, and then also when we get liquidity, basically from some sort of stimulus. Sometimes it's a new, like the last year has been not only the investment into the semiconductor industry, bringing stuff back on shore, but it's also been AI. So we've had two big whammies of explosive growth there. That's how you get a 25% move in stock markets over a 2.5 month span. It's those types of things that are happening and hitting at the same time. That's why everybody's saying, "Oh, yeah, this can't happen, can't continue." It can, because it's making people more productive, right? So, and then so for a new credit cycle is when you get rate cuts after they've been relatively higher, meaning this is what's coming, plus enough stimulus gives you a new credit cycle once those things filter into the economy and start taking it back up. So here's one of the better definitions that I found. It's through Investopedia, which is a great site, Investopedia.com. They say credit cycle describes recurring phases of easy and tight borrowing and lending in the economy. Here's the one that I came up with, and it's how to tell when the change occurs, when you go from one credit cycle to the next. You want that again?
That would be nice. Yep. Thanks. Appreciate you.
So a new credit cycle begins and the last one ends when the effects of newly lowered interest rates begin to positively impact the economy after a prolonged period of relatively higher rates. We're in a period of relatively higher rates now, right? So meaning the Fed's been increasing rates. And now it's just been plateaued, but they're still at those higher levels. So the effects of those lower rates, often accompanied by some sort of increased spending by the government to stimulate economic activity, is what ends up stabilizing the economy during a recession or a slowdown, and what ends up leading it out of it and back into a recovery. So as that happens, we go through 5 phases. So you've got 5 phases of the credit cycle. You have stabilization, recovery, slowdown, and recession. So stabilization is basically the brakes. Like economy's going down, the market's going down, things start to stabilize. And then during a recovery, they start to roll back up. Expansion means you're expanding into new horizons. You're expanding, the economy's getting bigger than it's ever been before. And then the slowdown is that slow grind where it starts to go. And it takes so long that's what kind of confuses people, is that, well, we've had a couple of cyclical downturns, those were fine, this one should be too, and then bam, you get the recession. That's when people get wiped out because they're not prepared for it. But in order to track it, you got to know how the score is kept. And this is one of the most important pieces of information I find that people don't understand when they're getting into this, is that the economy is tracked by GDP, specifically quarter-over-quarter GDP, and the changes. And markets, meaning stock markets and stock prices, are price. That's it. Like, if you buy a stock for $8 and you sell it for $8, you lost. It was wrong. It doesn't matter if that price goes back up to 12 a month later, you're still wrong. You have to be right with both price and time. And the economy is very similar. It doesn't matter that's where it comes into, the markets are never wrong, right? They're going to do what they do, and if you make an ill-timed decision or the wrong decision, it's going to hurt. So this is where these guys are better. There we go. Can you guys see these ones better? TVs? They're clear. So these are the credit cycle phases. After I went back to 1990 to and did it for 3 credit cycles, how these things played out. So this is the S&P 500. So it's the 500 largest companies in the country, and this and the gray shaded areas, that little guy there, and those are recessions. So those are what are commonly known as through NHIB, I forget what it stands. It's the government agency, but they're the ones that determine typically what is a recession. Now, the problem is that they're always late, right? Because the information has to come out first in order to know that you're in a recession. So by the time we find out that it's a recession, it's usually on its way out. So we start freaking out and start planning for a recession when it's actually we should be planning for the recovery. So, but you can see there are actually pretty clear patterns here where you have stabilization. Oh, that doesn't show up on TV. So you have stabilization. Things just stop going down. The recovery, we start rising back up, and then during expansion, we go back to new highs, and then you kind of got this slow grind rolling through the slowdown to the recession, and again, it becomes confusing because it's not uncommon to hit new highs in stock markets during the early stages of or throughout the entire slowdown, and sometimes in the early part of the recession. So again, that's a confusing thing for a lot of people. You're like, well, everything's that high. It's not just going to roll over, and it does. And then you see here the expansion is much less. Like we don't even get back to new highs until right before we roll back over during the 2000s. But that's a secular bear market, right?
Can you explain to me why you say in 2001 that recession, according to your gray area there, ends and then it drops off even further in what you're calling a recovery?
Yep. So that was 9/11. So that's why. So if you remember when they were saying if the terrorists were planning on doing this at the best possible time for themselves, they did it financially. This is why. It's because we were rolling out of a recovery, or we were rolling out of a recession, and then when 9/11 happened, it dropped markets. So
Okay.
markets came down,
Okay,
but
gotcha.
GDP didn't.
Sure.
And that's why. So that's why where the markets didn't quite get there. Wrong one.
Thanks, I wasn't paying attention. That was my
No. It's a great question. It's a very solid point. So this black line is GDP, overall GDP. So it's not quarter over quarter.
Sweet.
So that's why it's not considered a recession, because it's based on what the economy's doing, not necessarily just the market.
Yeah.
So of course when you the further back you go on these charts, the less extreme these seem. But you can definitely see, obviously, 2008, and then up when we get into COVID, how GDP just kind of dropped off the ledge at each point, right? And that's when they know that, hey, we're in a recession now. The problem is it's already happened. Like it's hitting us, and it's too late for us to do anything about it, right? So this came about through. This was a couple of years ago. I kind of stumbled upon this, and this is what I did when I told you I had all those notes. I took them all and I put them all over my office. I mean, it looked like, if you guys seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, where he's losing it, I was like, that's how my office looked. Like I was seriously like, I'd go hang out with my friends, to be like, I feel like I think I'm alright right now. So, but I took all the stuff, pieced it all together, and then I was like, okay, so this is how this stuff kind of flows together. You see how the different phases react, and then I was like, well, I put it all into a spreadsheet, and I accidentally created like this algorithm out of it. And I was just trying to find a way of could I gauge this somehow. And my hope was that it would tell us that we were hitting a recession as we were hitting it. At least a little bit behind, because that's still months ahead of what anybody else knows. So I was like, well, that's good. And it ended up being a little bit better. So it actually showed when I went back and did a real thorough back test to the other credit cycles, is that it actually hit a little bit before we went into recovery, and we went into recession, we went into stabilization. And that was really the hope, because then you know. right? You have an idea something's coming. You can really kind of get ready then. The indicators are supposed to indicate what's coming, not what's already happening, right? So that's what. So this is what it looks like, and it's not. Again, this is typically a 6-year cycle. The last couple have been 10-year cycles for the credit cycle. But so it's not something you have to pay attention to all the time, but it's definitely something you want to be aware of to know to know how to get ready for the coming months financially. So this is my definition for the economy tracker, which is it's an indicator that tracks the U.S. economy as it runs through its credit cycle. It's a data-driven system which breaks down the economy into 5 distinct phases based on economic cycle theory. Economic cycle theory has been around, I think, since 1864. So it's not something new. It's something that's been thoroughly researched, and it's there. I think we're all kind of aware of it to some point or another. But it's based on the economy tracker is based on the trends, quarterly trends of over 3 dozen data points that I track on a regular basis. And then it gives a weighted numerical value to each data point based on its typical performance during each phase of every credit cycle going back to the end of World War II. Why the end of World War II? Because that was a New World Order shift. That was a once in every 80-year shift where the whole world changes, right? And so before that, you're probably better off looking at British Imperial to get an idea of what the rest of the world is going through as well, because they were basically driving the market. So that's why I go back to World War II. But it includes data points, and then we're going to go over some of these, but just a few of them here, like interest rates, economic growth, debt growth, credit availability, liquidity, which is how much money is available in the system, yield curves, and profit margins. This is kind of important. I actually saw a gentleman who created an indicator talking about this the other day, and it kind of hit home with me because it's not necessarily data fitting, right? I didn't look at charts and go, okay, I'm gonna fit this here. How do I make that go there? But it is that before I even looked at those, I had an idea, obviously, because when I started researching this stuff, and as we've gone back looking at charts and going, okay, there's something there, but when I created this, I went and I grabbed all the data without looking at charts from the previous credit cycles, and then I went through each of the cycles and went through the performance of the economy tracker, and then I went and backfilled them onto the charts themselves, and was kind of like, I can't believe that actually worked out that way. So, but the important thing is that I was extremely conscious of being intellectually honest every step of the way, because it was never my intent to put this out. That's not why I did this. I did this to become a better trader. I did this to make money. I did this to understand what's happening. So if I'm lying to myself. I'm screwing myself over, right? It was only when I went back and put them on the charts and went, hold it, like, that's when all of a sudden the images of the contractor that's last in line, right? Like, they're the last ones. Like, they're still taking orders, and then boom, next day they got no business. That means that they just went out, they bought a bunch of supplies, and they're not getting that business that they just did it for, because there's no money left. It's just done. It just shut off one day for them. And that was always the thing that kind of hit for me, is that this needs to be something that we're all aware of. And again, when do I buy a home? When do I buy a car? You don't buy a car when rates start falling, because rates start falling because it's about to hit the fan. That's when rates start falling. So, and then I think that's when people, they go out, they overextend themselves at the absolute wrong time, but they don't know it's the wrong time. So here's characteristics. So this is like, imagine like, basically like over 40 of these things. Like this is what I do. And all these things are actually, you can find all of these online. Like, they're on different prospectuses, but they're all separated. They're all out there, right? None of them, like, nothing has it all together. But these are the characteristics of how these things perform during each. So if we look at, interest rates, they start off in stabilization lower because they were getting cut rolling into the recession or because of a recession. And then they're low during the recovery, and they enter expansion low and typically start to get hiked during expansion because the economy starts to heat up, right? And we don't want inflation. We roll into slowdown. Sometimes they're still hiking. Typically, though, this is when you get your plateau, and then sometimes they begin cutting here, sometimes they begin cutting right in the beginning of the recession. Debt growth and credit availability actually go together great. So credit availability, it's low. It starts off during stabilization as low. So there's money available to the banks to lend, but they're making sure that economic conditions are good enough in order to start lending again, because they don't want a bunch of loans to go bad, obviously, right? So because of that, debt growth decreases for businesses and for individuals, because first of all, everybody's trying to make ends meet, trying to get caught up, right? And then as that happens, debt growth goes stable, becomes stable in the recovery, where it just kind of goes sideways, because again, we just went through it. Don't want to overextend yourself. We still got the bad vibes from what we just went through, but the credit availability begins to grow. You start seeing the 0%, for cars and trucks and things like that. And then it starts. The debt growth starts increasing during the expansion, and credit availability gets a shot, and it starts expanding. That's how the economy starts expanding. We start spending more, we start buying more, and then we get our growth. Slow down, it starts to stabilize, and then the banks start tightening their credit, and it just continues. They basically continue to tighten it all the way through the recession until they know that we're coming through it. And then for debt growth, it's stable up and slow down, but then we get rising defaults during a recession because of job losses. Money dries up, can't make your payments, right? So once you know these things and what happens during each of these phases, then you can start looking through the headlines a little bit different, right? So these are all slowdown headlines, and these all just happened within the last couple of weeks. So Wall Street turns up the heat on companies to perform, meaning they're not going to be buying stocks of companies or buying shares of companies that aren't profitable right now, because we're on the backside of a credit cycle. So now is not so. If a company's not performing, they're getting hit harder now than they typically do during an expansion, or especially during a recovery. Why it's hard to get hired despite glowing jobs reports. Companies aren't that eager to hire right now. Like, they have jobs available, but they're not that interested in bringing on a bunch of new employees at the moment. Big one to track is transports. So transportation companies like UPS, they're starting. They've seen this persistent slowing. They've seen, in all of shipping, with the exception of overseas shippers, have been experiencing this as well. So fewer products are getting moved around the country, right? So which is telling you that things are starting to slow down. So here's a closer look at each of these credit cycles through each credit cycle. So this is the 90s credit cycle, and you can see how this reacted. And then so this, where the lines are where the phase actually started, where that point was triggered on the economy tracker. And then again, these the shaded gray line, the shaded area is when the economy is in recession. So, but what's important here is that no matter when you go through, is that you typically see mostly green, right? Obviously, you had a secular bear market. It was a tougher recession. That happens during secular bear markets. And then again, this is the 2010s. Most of that time is spent through the expansion. So most of the time, the economy is actually doing great. It's, I think it's 70% of the time it's up and 30% it's down. But we always feel like things are about to fall apart. This is quarter over quarter changes. So basically, a recession. This is where you get into what's a recession, right? Why was the one last year not a recession? Well, it wasn't a recession because there weren't job losses. Like, what's the point? Like, I mean, if we have lower growth and nobody loses their job, like, who cares? Like, it doesn't really affect anybody, right? Plus, when you have such a dramatic GDP swing because we shut down the entire world, you're going to expect some things to be kind of out of whack. But the important thing is that this is the growth. So this is the zero line for GDP, quarter over quarter growth. So as long as you're above this level, the economy is expanding. So that means it's grown, it's larger than it was the previous quarter. And then you get your downturn when things kind of fall apart at the end here. But the important thing is just to see how these things move the same way. Like, obviously they're a little different, there's some intricacies within there, but they move pretty much the same way as they go through. And these are, three pretty different times in history, drastically different times in history, and times in the markets. So, what does all this feel like? Questions first, actually. Yep. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Or kind of get through it? It works the same every time, just a little bit different, right? So, but as long as you know what's the same, then you can track it. So this is how basically when you go outside your home, this is what you feel. This is what it feels like being out in the economy, in the marketplace, just driving around. And what's interesting about this is that it shows that we're always behind, right? So one of the things that I think trips up people the most is that typically the stock markets are about 6 months ahead of the actual economy. And the reason that happens, and more importantly, by the time the rest of the country, by the time everybody realizes we're in a recovery, the stock market's already up on average 30%. That's a big change for something that maybe grows typically 8 to 10% a year, right? And it just jumped 30% within a very small amount of time. And what that tells you is that this is really more of a story of how money flows through the economy. And so we're always last to know. We're the last ones in line. The money gets filtered into the system. It hits the banks, and the banks start dispersing it out to different industries. Obviously, like the safer ones first, but we as the consumer and we as the people on the ground, it always hits us last. So the reason that it goes in the market first is that when you track this stuff, what's happening. You know that this is what's happening because it happens the exact same way every time. So investors that have been through this, they start buying stocks knowing what typically happens. So typically transports are one of the first to come out of a recession. They're usually leading the way. Now you can throw semiconductors into that. It's another transportation sector essentially. It's just transporting different material, different things. So, but by the time all that stuff gets to us, we're last. So that's why when we're in a stabilization, when it's time to go, okay, things are finally getting good again, it's downright depressing. Like, it seems like everywhere you look, there's more for lease signs. Another person has lost their job, and you just don't expect to see any, and more importantly, don't expect to see any good positive headlines come when the market and the economy does start to stabilize, because fear sells, right? And so the people that have been telling you for the last 12 years that the market's going to collapse, they're going to feel vindicated for several months. And then the people that are accurately calling that the economy is actually firming up and is about to get better again, they're called reckless. They're like pilloried because they're actually saying like, hey, things aren't that bad. It's like, well, how can you say that? People are suffering. Like, well, yes, but things are getting better, and they're going to feel better later on. And then when you get to the recovery, it's always met with skepticism in the beginning. It's like, because we've just had so many things where we got a little bit of good information, and it's like 2 pieces of good information, 8 bad pieces of information follow it, right? So we're in that mindset. So it's always met with skepticism, and then eventually, though, it doesn't happen. So you get a little bit of a guarded optimism of everybody, like, hey, maybe it's good, so and so found a job again, and there's a new restaurant that opened up down the street, and that space has been empty for 9 months or 12 months or whatever. But then as we roll, it becomes obvious, and then the optimism just turns into that newfound confidence where we're like, all right, we're back, things are good again, let's not screw it up this time. But unfortunately, it just keeps going. It just keeps, it builds, right? This is where you get into that human behavior story where it's like, okay, it turns into this newfound confidence, and then it turns into excitement, like we're back, everything's great, and then that turns into euphoria, like we're never gonna have another recession again, everything's fantastic, and everybody feels like a genius because it seems like everybody's making more money than they ever had, right? Because that's how the system works, right? And so then you get into the slowdown, And it turns into a slowdown because euphoria turns into complacency. This is just going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. Everything's fine. We'll have these momentary setbacks, and we're going to get right back out of this. We're going to continue to grow. But eventually, it doesn't happen for a while, right? And we're just kind of like, well, it should have happened by now, but it hasn't. And that kind of turns into like this false hope. But it will. It'll be fine. Everybody's been saying that we're going to be in a recession for the last 12 years. They keep on being wrong. We're going to keep going. It'll be all right. But then things just kind of continue to go and roll, and the conditions weaken and deteriorate, and then the false hope turns into anxiety. Like, is it going to? And then it just turns into like outright denial. Now we'll be fine. It'll be good. We'll be good. And then boom, it hits the fan, and then that turns into panic. The problem with panic is that then you're overly emotional. You're making bad decisions, right? Well, screw it. I'm going to take that vacation. I'm going to buy that car. Like, worst time, right? But as that goes, then eventually it turns into capitulation. Like, yeah, this is like, we're in the middle of it now. Like, this sucks. Like, we're not happy. But then you gotta blame somebody, because we can't blame ourselves, right? That's like, it's like the first thing about being a human. It's being human 101. It's somebody else's fault. I didn't do this. So that becomes anger. Who are we gonna point the finger at? Whose fault is it, right? You can do that for so long, and eventually you get exhausted. And then you just get downright depressed. But here's the interesting thing. So by the time you get depressed, by the time the whole country gets depressed, we're usually coming out of it. Like, we're on our way back out, right? So if you're ahead of this, then you can actually make some changes.
Except the problem is we're right at the end of that 80-year cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. But here's the thing. We've been at the end of that 80-year cycle how many times before, right?
Yeah, but
there was
the good part of the New World Order shift last time.
But there was the Civil War before that. That was the previous 80-year. And then before that was the Revolutionary War. So there's always something. It's always going to shift. But do you really think that the people with money are just going to take all their... Like, where are they going to send it? Like, if you're going to send it to China, like, that's basically your best other option other than the U.S. right now. But the problem with that, they're locking down billionaires' money. They're not letting them withdraw. So you really don't have another option at this point. So that money's there, that money exists, it's going to go somewhere. And it's going to go to where... And money always goes to where it's treated best, right? It's not being treated well in China, so where's it going to go? So... But that's a whole other...
Yeah.
Bigger, right?
Yeah, I'm shutting up now.
I hear you. I know where you're coming from.
I'm just shutting up now.
No, I hear you. But, so anyway, so like, what do you do during these phases? Because that's the key, right? What do you do? So let's start with recession, because that's when it really, that's when you're doing your real work for the next credit cycle. So this is trading journaling, basically 101. So you journal your trades when you trade. You see what you did right, what you did wrong, if you broke any of your rules, and what your mindset was like. Sometimes it's even like diet, or I didn't sleep enough, so I made a bad decision. But what you want to do is this helps if you journal, once a day or at least once a week, to kind of what you're doing within your business or your financial life. But you want to look back and see what you did well. Like, that's the most important thing. People always think like, I'm gonna look and see what I did and how I can improve, and they get so focused on the negative that they forget to go, I did those things really, really well. And it gets kind of like downright depressing. You're like, I should have done a lot better. But you want to look for the things you did right. And how can you improve that? How can you make that better? And then you want to see, what are the things that, if I would have made a change here or there, that I would have gotten a little bit more out of that last credit cycle. So you're kind of gauging yourself on what to do, on how you did in the past credit cycle. Then you want to take that and you want to develop your plan of attack for the next growth wave. So once I know everything's getting better again, where do I want to go? What's that next level I want to reach? What's the other thing I want to do with my life, with my business? And then, but more importantly, like, if you prepared for this and you know this stuff is coming, again, like, business is slow. So why grind when there's nothing to be there? Why plant when there's nothing to cultivate, right? Spend the time with your loved ones. Spend the time in rejuvenating. It's a mind, body, and spirit thing. If nothing's happening, then you're only going to put yourself in a further hole by trying to make something happen when it's just when the wind's in your face, right? And then if you're unprepared, you weren't aware that this was coming, it's just survive at all costs. but knowing that things will soon get better, and that as soon as everybody thinks it's about to get a lot worse, that's typically when it gets better. That's when it starts getting better. For stabilization is typically a small, just a small area where we think we kind of bottom out, but that's when you want to finalize your plan and mentally prepare for the next growth wave. Obviously it's different for us in here, but like if anybody's like out looking for a job, like this is the time that you go, okay, these are the companies I want to work for. Or if you want to switch jobs or get into another industry, like this is going to be your safest time to do so. Because you're coming out of the time when people lose their jobs and more jobs are added. So you can actually grow with the company during a credit cycle. Then when the recovery begins happening, you don't want to jump all in at once. You don't want to go cannonball and say, okay, I saved up all this money, I did a perfect job at this, now it's throwing it all to marketing, or I'm throwing it all back in the market. Because that's actually, there's a number of traders in the past that have actually blown themselves out that way. Because sometimes you still get a dip, right? So the proper way to do it is to start allocating funds a little bit here and there. Like start small and build on it. When you see that things are working and continue to work, then add a little bit more and add a little bit more. And then also, this is the time when it's the best and safest time to find your deals, right? To buy that car, to buy that home. Your job is more protected. The economy's on great footing. It's going to take a lot to kind of throw it off. So this is when it's safest to make those decisions. And then expansion, that's it. That's the grind era. Like that's left lane, hammer down. Go get it while you can because it's all over the place, right? Go get what you've been planning for. This is the time when you're going to see, your significant other and your kids a little bit less. But you know what? But this is the point to do so, right? You don't do it all the time, but this is when the getting's good, you got to get it. And then when you hit the slowdown, that's when you want to gradually cut expenses and then start allocating that into your savings because there's an approaching financial storm coming on. It might not be a big deal, it might be. The bigger pattern you have, the better your chances of getting through it unscathed, and that's kind of the point. But you don't want to do it where it's like, okay, I am cutting, a quarter of my budget. It's like, no, it takes time. Like typically it's like an 18-month span. So you can do a little bit this month and then a little bit that month. You don't want to disrupt everybody. That's not the point. And it doesn't help anybody either. So, where do we go now? Because where are we at? And so this is a look at the current credit cycle. And what I hate about this is that it just changed. So, and the reason I hate that is that I just put this presentation together, and I hate being the one that's like, we're kind of coming around the backside of this and this. But here's the thing, though, is that typically a slowdown you have about 18 months, and actually almost 2 years until you typically see a recession. Then too. Will this time be different? It's always a little bit different. We'll see what happens. But obviously, this is not a typical credit cycle. We have to keep that in mind because it started with shutting down the entire world, with commerce around the entire world. That's never happened before. Nothing even remotely close to that has happened. So it's not a surprise to see that during expansion the markets jumped and then they spent most of a significant part of the expansion in a downturn. But meanwhile GDP was still growing. But it's the back and forth, right? It's back and forth, and then this is when GDP. We had 2 months of slow growth or of negative growth, and that's when people were saying, well, it's got to be a recession. But nobody ended up losing their jobs, so it didn't emanate out through the rest of the economy. But so now that we're rolling into a slowdown, this is where you want to go, okay, how many streaming services am I using? It's just preparing. And a recession doesn't always have to hit, but it hits I think it's like 97% of the time. Like sometimes you get lucky, sometimes, but you want to plan on it happening, and then it's just a matter of the severity. And then, so now that we know it's gotten into a slowdown, it's, now we want to look for things for confirmation. So this is just like trading. You want to look for confirmation on something that whether it's a pattern or a breakout of some sort. You want to look for it to confirm. You want to see a test of levels and then go back higher. So for a slowdown, what we're going to look for is volatility, and this is a trading thing, but it's called the VIX. And typically, and what you see during a slowdown is that it hits a new low, which it just did last week. It could go lower still. That wouldn't be abnormal either, but it hits a new low and then it begins to start trending higher. So now you want to watch, if you watch markets, you want to see if the VIX continues to trend higher for the coming months. That's going to tell us, again, that's going to give us more confirmation that we are indeed in a slowdown. Credit availability continues to tighten. I think we're all experiencing that. I think we all see that, especially being agents. Not everybody. This is why people can't get loans right now, right? That could a couple of years ago, and the same, let alone higher rates. But they're still going to have a hard time by the time rates get cut. Inflation enters typically at higher levels, which it has, and then it breaks lower. It's already broken lower, but we're still north of 3%. So it's got to get back down to 2%. So we're going to look for that break down to 2%. Rates typically come in where they're plateauing, which they've done for the last year, but eventually begin to get cut in the slowdown phase. This is interesting because I'm seeing this on a regular basis now. M&A activity, mergers and acquisitions. This is when they peak. This is when you see a ton of high valuation and mega deals. Like one was just announced again today with ConocoPhillips buying Marathon Oil. It's those kind of things that you see these massive deals because they come at the end of cycles where asset prices are elevated. So you get these huge, it looks like they're massive deals, but really what these companies are doing is they're getting ready. They're finding, they're actually getting ready for the next cycle. They're fully aware of all this stuff that's going on. And then eventually profits begin contracting for publicly traded companies. I think a lot of companies thought that was going to happen over the last year, so they were guiding weaker, and that's another reason why the market's gone higher is because their guidance was low, but the profits were still there. They were still growing at a good clip, but eventually that'll start to turn back down. But here's the thing that really trips people up. Markets continue to reach higher highs typically during the slowdown and sometimes into the recession. And that's where it's like, well, it seems like everything's fine. So remember how I said the market's typically 6 months ahead of the economy? It is until the end when it's typically about 2 to 3 weeks. And so that's why it's that big whoosh. Nobody's really prepared for it. So, and the event risk, so now that we're in a slowdown, this is where Bear Stearns, 2006, right? This is where these things start to happen. Is somebody was over leveraged, and then a big bank or a big conglomerate is over leveraged, and then they go under, and then they, depending on how big they are, they might take somebody else down with them. Because basically what happens there is all of that money that was there the day before that company held is now gone, just gone. And so the company that lended them the money, if they lended them too much, that might do the same thing for them, and that's the spiral that it starts going down. So you want to look for these types of those types of events, and then you're going to start to see more and more stock downgrades, which we're seeing, but then eventually defaults will start to kind of rise here as well too as people start to run out, because business isn't going to be what it has been. This is just how it rolls. So for us specifically, this is what gets kind of cool with this. This is the next phase that I'm actually working on right now. But this is anchoring the economy to different industries. So this is our industry. And so what we can see is, so this is existing home sales. And we all know it. Like we're one of the first, like the real estate industry is one of the things that helps propel the economy out of a recession, right? So money becomes more available at the end, as you get through the recession, so you get the lower rates, and then you get some stimulus, and then people start buying a little bit more homes. They start going back to Home Depot and to Lowe's. They start spending more money, or people that didn't buy a home are putting more money into theirs, and so that's why we're ahead of the curve. So we actually typically start moving back up in the stabilization phase, and sometimes during a recession, right? We're one of the things that leads the way out of it. But this is where it gets confusing, is that then we kind of typically top out before everybody else does, right? We saw that, we've experienced that now. right? I mean, we're in a recession. Real estate industry is in a recession right now. So, but you can see how when we overlap it, how that plays into, and then so that's what I was saying, like that's when how you can start setting up like a marketing budget, because as you're rolling, as the rest of the country is going, oh man, we're just hitting a recession, we've only been a couple months in, you actually at that point, that's the time to start bumping up your marketing, because you know you're going to be coming out of it before everybody else. So, and this is current. So you can see this is, I mean, the nosedive that we've had in existing home sales. This is just one metric to use for this too, but it kind of tells the story on our industry. And then this is an example of how real household income is actually affected by the markets here too. How we rise, and as things start to slow down, we're always last to find out, right? So we're always last to find out. That's when the household incomes drop. That's why things are so difficult for us. We're last in line. We're last to get it, right? I think I have more on here. And then employment rate. So typically, you see the employment rate is falling off, starts falling off a cliff in the recovery phase. That's what helps leads to the recovery, more people with jobs, and then it starts filtering back up as you get towards the tail end of the slowdown and the recessionary phase. They're starting to peak back up a little bit right now. They're starting to roll back up, but it's still a little too early in the game to say is that trend going to continue right now. So, and I ended it with his quote. So Benjamin Graham, he wrote oh man, now I'm completely spacing the name of. Think of it here in like 30 seconds once I say this. It's Warren Buffett's favorite investing book. I can't believe I'm spacing it. But anyway, his is, the market cycle will once more prove to be a human nature cycle. Its economic background will have changed, but not its basic character nor the consequences of its character. It's always the same. It's just our words are different and the clothes that we wear are different. But the same thing keeps going on over and over and over again. If you can find the main larger term trends, then you can actually use that information to help benefit you going forward. Because the more and more cycles you go through, then hopefully you start building up an even bigger, your returns on your investments of your time and your energy become greater. And that's kind of the point. So.
The intelligent investor.
Intelligent investing, thank you so much. Great. Yes, I'm like, I was like, investing.
Some
Yes,
investing.
yes. Questions? Yes.
So you do your trading in the standard, like the stock market,
Yep.
right? What are your thoughts on the crypto?
Right now, I'm a big fan of crypto.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's, I think we got it, like you said, so we're in the slowdown. I'm looking at it as a lot of things that are hitting right now are actually smaller companies, growth companies, and that actually aligns with crypto well. Crypto's not the dollar. It's not going to be the dollar. It's not going to overtake the dollar anytime soon. One way to know that is that we say, well, how much is a Bitcoin worth? Well, we say how many dollars is a Bitcoin worth, right? If that changes, then you'll know that's the key. But I mean, right now it's it's an investment vehicle. We'll see where it goes in the future, but they're now that they're allowing ETFs and allowing to be traded on the standard markets. I mean, it's here. I think what you're going to see you're going to see a lot of what they call the shit coins. Those are going to go away, and those really do. I mean, that's really all. I could fire up a crypto coin myself right now and just sell. It's just like, hey, buy this, so everybody's got it, and then I can just sell out. It's a pump and dump scam, right? But but I don't think it's a hedge against inflation. We were told that it was, but it fell with everything else when inflation started running. I think you want to look at it more in line of like a technology or a growth stock. So, but I think you're going to see a lot more people and businesses starting to accept it as a form of payment, though. But I think the cat's out of the bag. So where it goes, and if governments decide to one day just shut it down, is another thing.
Title companies are set up to.
Yeah. So I think it's too far along at this point. I think there's been too much mass acceptance for them to do something. So, does that help? Does that kind of make it a little bit clearer system that we operate in?
Very interesting, but I don't think we're going to be experts like right now.
Yeah, no. It's definitely it's
Okay, where are we?
it's intriguing. No, it's something like once you see it, it's kind of, I call it situational awareness. It's like knowing how to play on first down in the first quarter with 14 minutes left in the game, rather than with 30 seconds left and you're down by 6 and you're on the 20-yard line. You're not going to play the same way as
Nice analogy.
Yeah, it's situational awareness. It's knowing where you're at and what's happening and making decisions based on that.
So what you said, like, that's totally important to us. Like,
Mhm.
you know, for us, you're giving us some hope there at the end. I thought you said that, you know, we could get ready.
Well, and that's kind of like when I really sat down. That was like really the thing that stuck out, is that people, I feel like it's going to be the worst when it starts becoming good again, right? And I think you guys are going to be at the forefront of it. Agents are going to start agents always start making money again before everybody else, because that's when people are buying homes. That's part of what helps take us out of a recession, is real estate. So, and there's not enough homes. So it's even with the NAR, whatever, it's still, time is going to move on. There wasn't an NAR before, and it'll be different, but we'll adapt. That's what we do.
I'd be interested in reading your book.
I'll let you know. Yeah, it's funny. It's like the damn book's like done. I'm just like, I got to figure out like how to get it back out, all the publishing stuff. I'm like, oh man. I'll let you know.
I need to sign it.
Actually, yeah. And then I'll send you a link. So I started writing about this more and keeping people updated on what's happening with through the phases, and then just kind of keeping like a real time log of it of what's happening. And I haven't in the last couple months, because I was putting this together and getting the book stuff done. And then there's some crypto stuff in there too, on what to see and what to expect, and again, what to look for confirmation. So it feels like a lot of people are interested in it, but it's just not. It's tough to start. Like, I was talking to a buddy, and he's like, how do you know who to trust? He's like, everybody's trying to get something, right? But there's nobody providing. At least I feel, because I was looking for it for 20 years, just standard information, right? Like, give me like some base, what do you think about crypto? People are like, I think it's the greatest thing ever. It's like, there's ups and downs to it. You got to know all about it, right? So, yeah. So, cool. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me know if you guys have any other questions. And because I'll be here for the roundtable too.
You understand as well.
But I hear you have looked into that's a big part.
I'm not liking it either.
Yeah.
I don't like what I see.
It's but it's funny, because my the fruit never falls far from the tree, right? Or the nut in this case. Like, so my dad and I were cleaning out a property that my grandfather had gotten, and my dad lives in now, and we found this book, and it's called Business Problems of 1958, right? And like my whole family, we bitch about the economy all the time. It's like our favorite pastime, right? And so he gave it to me. He's like, hey, you're into this stuff. This was like around like 2011 we were doing this. And I'm reading through it like a year ago, and I'm going, he wrote the damn thing. He wrote this manuscript about all the problems of business and why the whole world was going to fall apart because of this. And he was just writing it during the recession of 1958. And then the next year, we went right back into it. We were coming. And so it's that, and then a couple of really good books, other than that Confusion of Confusions, is Devil Take the Hindmost. And it takes you through all of the panics from the last 400 or 500 years. The South China Sea bubble, all of them, like every single one. And you see it's the same damn thing overall, but we always come out the other side. And we always come out better no matter what. And that was really the thing that illuminated me, is it was like, holy cow, like this is, if you're just kind of aware of this and you have a positive sense, it always turns out well, right? And I think that cat's kind of out of the bag for people in general, because I think what is it, like poverty rate is like 80% of what it was in the past or whatever. Like the poverty rate's like non-existent compared to what it was up until like 100 years ago, right? So when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, we're progressing. It's just that those changes are tough during the time, right? And so that's really where it comes from.
Well, it comes from selfishness.
Well, always.
Everybody's worried about what
They're a thing, right? They're a thing. Yeah, exactly. But that's kind of like what I was thinking about with this too, is that it's like, well, if we have a different view of this, then maybe that helps kind of alleviate that too. Because then you start saying, well, wait a minute, well, my best interest is aligned with everybody else's best interest. And I think that's kind of the big thing that is.
Nobody takes that step.
It's the financial markets, right? That's the thing. But I think you're going to see that more. I think you're going to see that a lot more. And I think the pandemic actually helped. I without the pandemic, I don't do this. Like when the pandemic went back in my mind, I was always like, if I get a chance, I'm going to dive into the market and I'm going to learn everything that I can, every nook and cranny. And when we got the shutdown, like that is exactly what I did. I went like batshit crazy, just learning everything I could and trying to connect it all. And now coming out the other side of it, I see a lot of other people have too. And everybody's coming from a different angle, and it's helping because we're helping fill in the pieces that we never had available before. First of all, we got the data, right? We got the data is freely accessible to everybody. That's never happened before. The data itself was never even really available, but now that we have digitization and we have analytics, we can actually look at things a lot different and say, no, we can see clear patterns now, which we never really do, we've never been able to do. So I think that's kind of like that whole progression, and I think that's where, that was my feel on this, is that the more people that know about this, the smoother this becomes for everybody else. Because you don't have that emotional, oh, everything's falling apart, or I'm never not going to be making this much money. Like it tells you and it shows you that yes, that time is coming. Like because without it, we're running blind, right? So that's kind of the point.
So the slowdown just started, you say they average 18 months?
About. So and actually I'm going through the last three right now, and I'm trying to find every little thing about, like, I look for things like, hey, what always happens first? Does anything ever happen? Like whatever happened, like is there anything that signifies? And quite honestly, most of it's all over the place. Like there's not a thing that happens first. There's not a thing that leads each time. It's all, but it's in aggregate. It all tells the same story every single time, and that's kind of what it is. But it's but it was teetering. The reading was teetering on expansion to slow down after last quarter anyway. So it was just only took one thing, and we got like 4 changes. And it jumped.
There's things that we see, like all the 99-cent stores went away.
Right.
T-Mobile is taking over your cellular,
Yep.
something like that.
And that's the consolidation that they do to prepare themselves for what's coming, right? And that's why you get a lot of M&A activity now. So.
Now I won't be able to see those news without remembering you.
Well, that was always the frustrating thing for me, is I was like, this was like 2008, like that whole experience, like that was like, because it was, but then you get into like 10 and like in 2000, I'm like, this was just bad information like a year ago. Why is the market raging on this right now? And not knowing that and then going, okay, what are the things, like what is the change? What's the difference between now and then? That's all the stuff that helped kind of put this in. But you got to go through hell to get to this point, though, because it takes a lot for you to stop and go, okay, what am I what am I missing here? Because it's always something you're like, okay, there's something big that I missed there. What was it? Because for me, it was just my trading. It was like there were times I noticed that trading went really good, and then nothing was hitting. Like the same setups, the same patterns, same everything. And I was like, well, what the hell? Like what changed? And I was just like, I gotta find out what that change is so that I can be better at this. And that's when I realized I was like, holy smokes, like this is when, this is like a real headline to pay attention to, and other headlines are just kind of like, they're there because they need to fill space, or they want to scare the hell out of you to get some clicks. And that's usually what it is.
Yeah.
That's usually what it is. But remember too, like a lot of these journalists don't even know what the hell they're talking about. Like if they did, they would be partaking.
90% of them are scripted, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And they're trying to tell a story, right? There's some sort of an overall story. Like we see it everywhere. So.
Just counting the bucks.
I appreciate it. Thank you so
Not as
much.
much
Again,
as
you
we
guys have
do.
any questions, like any more, like, or any suggestions too? Be awesome. Yeah.
I was serious about your book.
I'll definitely let you know. It's
How are you going to do that?
How am I
Because
gonna
I'm
do-
serious.
how am I gonna do?
How are you going to let me know?
Aren't you lying?
Oh, yes, I am. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, it's that's the frustrating thing now. Is because again, this is where this is cool for like market stuff, but now I'm like I gotta learn like everything about how to publish this thing. I'm like, damn it.
That's probably going to be the easy part.
It's the harder part for me because I'm just not interested.
Oh, wow.
So I just want to have it published. Like whereas like the market, like I'm totally interested in this, so I can spend hours doing it. Now I'm just like, nah, I gotta go do this, I gotta do that. But actually, I got a buddy of mine that he's a graphic designer, and he is starting to help me out with it. So we're done. So I'm just like the hard part's done.
Are you going to share this presentation?
I can. Yeah, absolutely.
I like to look at the
Yep,
graphs.
yep. Yeah, I think for me it's the graphs that kind of like tell the story,
Yeah.
right?
So, okay, never mind.
No, go ahead.
No, that's okay.
No. Trust me. If you got a question on it, I do too.
There's lunch for everybody too.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. That was my question. When do we eat?